went on over to the White House, and it came back with the very tight round hand of Franklin Roosevelt. I want no French returned to Indochina. FDR. And I remember the excitement I felt that this was probably the first clear U.S. policy toward a Southeast Asian state.
Now, the thing that I think we fail to recognize is that Ho Chi Minh, communist or whatnot, is considered by the people of Vietnam, and I'm speaking now of millions in South Vietnam, as the George Washington of his country. He's the man that they think threw off the French, the colonialism. Just as we had our 1776, they had theirs in the 1940s. He also led an underground movement against the Japanese who had occupied Vietnam and the whole Indochina Peninsula during World War II. And whether we like him or not, whether we like the particular economic system or social system that he might develop or not, we must remember that he is indeed considered by many, the peasants, the small people, the little people in South Vietnam and North Vietnam, as the George Washington of his country.
General Gracie was the principal British officer responsible for accepting the surrender of the Japanese in French Indochina south of the 16th parallel. And that was his mission. But after he arrived in Saigon with his troops, he found that the French were without means of maintaining law and order. And so he, as I understand it, and as I recall it, he took the weapons that he derived from the Japanese and turned them over to French military officers and men. If this had not been done, in all probability, the French could not have recaptured their control at Saigon.
I met Ho Chi Minh for the first time in Hanoi at the end of 45, sent there by d'Argentlieu, Admiral d'Argentlieu, High Commissioner, sent by de Gaulle in Saigon, wanted me to contact the Viet Minh leader for the first time. I said to him, I am sent to you by the High Commissioner in the name of General de Gaulle to tell you that we want Vietnam to join us in the French Union. Looked at me and he said, the French Union? What's that? Is it a circle or is it a square? That was a test, because there is a Chinese proverb, a lot of Chinese proverbs, which identify heaven and intelligence with the circle and earth and solidity with the square. Is it an idea or is it a fact? Is it somewhere? And so I answered, and I think that it's one of the occasions when Ho Chi Minh has been just a little surprised. I answered, I don't know. He said, but what are you doing here? I said, I come to ask you, because we have to build it together.
Towards the end of November of 1946, when the admiral commanding the French fleet in the Bay of Tonkin, in his words, decided to teach the Vietnamese government a hard lesson. And the fleet stood off of Haiphong and shelled the city until between 6,000 and 10,000 were killed.
He said, I have no army. It's not true now. I have no army, 1945. I have no finance. I have no diplomacy. I have no public instruction. I have just hatred. And I will not disarm it until you give me confidence in you. Now, this is the thing on which I would insist, because it's still alive in his memory as in mine. For every time Ho Chi Minh has trusted us, we betrayed him.
Here you had a country which was not really just divided at the 17th parallel. You had fought the Indochina War. And all the best and most talented Vietnamese of a generation had faced in 1946 and 1947 the alternative of the French or the Viet Minh. The best of a generation, the kind of young men who would, join up the day after Pearl Harbor in this country. It was are you going to fight to kick out the French, or are you going to, be a French puppet? So the most talented people of the generation all signed up, and the Viet Minh won this war, and it was an enormously popular national war. And at the end of it, they came up with a dynamic society which had won a war, which was tested, which was tough, which had brought up to the top the very best of a generation.
Well, there are some similarities between the French effort in the Indochina War in Vietnam and the Americans. The Americans are just so much more powerful than the French were. They have so much more artillery. They have so much more air power. They have so many more men. They have so much more wealth than the French ever had. So that there are not going to be any Dien Bien Phu's in the American presence there.
In Washington, the U.S. Secretary of Defense...
The equipment which we have sent to Indochina is highly technical. So we are sending technicians as a temporary training force. We are sending planes, but no pilots. We are not sending combat troops.
We have seen no reason for the abandonment of the so-called Navarre Plan. That plan, as you may recall, broadly speaking, was a 2-year plan and contemplated a very substantial buildup of local forces and their training and equipment.
The French moved into Dien Bien Phu in 1953. In January of 1953, Parachute Battalion came into the area, and the idea was there were two aspects of it. One, to control a piece of ground, and then to prevent the Viet Minh from sweeping on into Laos.
I do not expect that there is going to be a communist victory in Indochina. By that I don't mean that there may not be local affairs where one side or the other will win victories. But in terms of a communist domination of Indochina, that I do not accept as a probability.
The French generals did not believe that artillery could be brought to bear in sufficient quantity. So correspondingly, they were not active in their patrolling outside of the particular perimeter. The feature was to keep the focus on the area, not to cause the quick rush of the battle position, but to build the particular battle position.
The French miscalculated, as I think did we, in the degree of sophistication of the weaponry that was deployed on the high ground. They didn't think they could get these pieces up there, but they did somehow.
The Battle of Dien Bien Phu is a significant phenomenon in military history, and from all of the standpoints that one views war, it achieved a particular political objective in the full Clausewitzian sense of the term. It represented a tremendous logistical effort on the part of the North Vietnamese, or of General Giap, to move the artillery pieces, which changed the balance of this particular battle significantly.
Forces of aggression seem to be concentrating just at one point, at Dien Bien Phu, where the resistance is extremely gallant against overwhelming odds.
The French began the war as a colonial war. They try many times to change this very nature of the war, trying to change it in a civil war, a war between the right and the left in Vietnam, and after that, in international war, a crusade against communism.
It was clear that the French were in deep trouble at Dien Bien Phu. And then Admiral Radford thought that if we went in with air, we could knock them out.
Senator Morton, as you know from my letter to you, we were very interested in a meeting that was called by Mr. Secretary Dulles and Admiral Radford, in which you played a part, and in which 8 members of the Congress of the United States were present, 5 senators and 2 representatives. I wonder if you could give us your best recollection of who was at that meeting.